So I'm really excited to introduce to you Fabrice Poussin, who has been published many times and Silver Bow Publishing. I wanted to read a little bit about the kind of feedback. Poussin's work drifts through diverse settings and subjects, anchored only by the rich and moving language of each poem. In this collection, you will encounter vagabonds and battlefields and a third grader on a bicycle. You will go in and out of dreams and hear beautiful and inconclusive musings about the meaning of art and life and the cosmos. Through these sundry landscapes, actors and themes, you will experience God's gracious gift of allowing us to feel through someone else's words. That is written by Dr. Corey Barnes, author of Kingdom Children. The next passage says, "The passion of the writing, the joy of common days, silence and prayers, and the pondering of the soul add up to, in Fabrice Poussin's collection, in Absentia, a shimmering ethereality, a stubborn wisdom, taking us to fortress and cathedral, to ocean and boneyard. These poems shine a light on the next realm and the depth yet not traveled." Read this book for its keen feeling, its illumination, and that is Dr. William Wolfett, author of Spring Up, Everlasting Poems. Now, a bit about the author himself. Poussin teaches French and English at Shorter University in Rome, Georgia. Author of novels and poetry, his work has appeared in Kestrel, Symposium, La Pensée Universelle, Paris, The Chimes, the Shorter University Award-winning poetry and arts publication, and many other magazines. His photography has been published in the Front Porch Review, the San Pedro River Review, as well as other publications. So we're in for a treat today hearing Fabrice read. Now, Candace has a few things to say.
Yes, thank you, Carol. Well, Fabrice Poussin has presented the world with a wonderful gift, his book of poetry in Absentia. He takes us from the mundane to the sublime, from the earthly to the heavenly, and from outside ourselves to inside ourselves to get in touch with our innermost being. Poussin reminds us of how alone we really are. We are born alone, we die alone. Some are fortunate enough to have made a difference in others' lives, but alas, and even so, most feel alone in a crowd. His poem on page 86, titled Waiting for an End, expresses this sentiment so eloquently in the opening lines of the poem. Sitting in the somber corner in a library like no other, forgotten under a layer of lives. But I won't encroach on his reading any further. I now present the amazing Fabrice Poussin.
Thank you so much for this introduction. And Candace, what you just said was poetry itself. I very much really want to underscore the fact that you mentioned the notion of going into the sublime, because that is really something that I'm trying to accomplish here. Originally, I had planned on reading in order, but then I changed my mind. I opened on page 29 with one that's called Fear of the Light. And as it was mentioned in the couple of comments that were made before by those two people, I look at many different things from my own life, my own childhood, and also observing people that I see every day. The first one is called Fear of the Light. And this is one that, as you mentioned, someone mentioned that it was about a third grader, and the third grader happens to be me, riding on his bicycle from school under a terrible thunderstorm, and I will never forget. I thought that day I would die. So here's the poem. Fear of the Light. I remember the lightning a little too well. and the thunder rolling still in my ears. Hard rain, cold as ice, on a tiny little back, 2 miles on a bike, from 3rd grade, all alone. You taught me to ride, then you let me go. Another rite of passage, and yet still a little failed. Under the crushing skies, hoping to survive, to make it home one more time. Under disbelieving eyes, God looked down and smiled. Of course, he made it all okay. Even as I crossed the power lines and lightning exploded above. But I didn't ride that day. I walked under the threat. My school bag soaked through and through, and I cried. Or was it just hail? So that day, again, I will never forget. It was terrifying. If you've ever seen lightning, and as a child, I thought that if lightning hit the power lines, I was certain to die. And that's what I experienced. It's the worst, the worst day I could remember as a child. The next one I'm going to read is quite different, and this is much more recent to me. It's called Flight of the Swallows. And this is also an amazingly personal experience. This happened 6 years ago now. And this is after the death of my father. My mother had passed away 5 years earlier. And I was sitting at the house that they have in France. And I was sitting in what I created as a reading room. And there's a reading room, and then there's another room right next to it to give access to the outside. And 2 swallows, 2 days after my father passed away, flew into that first room, into the reading room when I was reading, and flew around me about 2 or 3 times and then flew away. And I cannot help but believe that this was, in a way, and one may think this is silly, but to me, it was my parents who had been reunited and were just saying goodbye. And that's what this poem is about. Flight of the Swallows. Her body spoke, the soul was silent, far too often, but he knew. In all the pain, the heart was quiet, and it hurt, but he knew. 65 years, flesh and bones made up of the words. The truth remained in the shadow. Magnificent it was. Oceans of tears it shed and caused. The body that suffered crippled the mind, and then it was silent. The pain cried and burnt the flesh to be reborn. And he knew all along the beautiful one that came back for him. 1/4 score passed. She waited in the corner. He knew always what no one else did. And now they live again. 2 friends, free. Swallows of the barn who one evening bid me farewell in the sweet flutter of their wings. When the body spoke, the soul was silent, but he knew her heart all along. And what I want to add to this too is my mother was in great pain for a long part of her life. And I think as children, we never really understood that, but my father did. And this is what I mean by he knew all along, something we didn't know. Another one that is one of my favorites is called Grace Undercover. And we always think about, or many people think about life as being too hard. And well, I recognize that, of course, life is not a bed of roses, as they say. But I think that these moments of suffering are almost necessary and that we must look at them in a positive way, if possible at all. So Grace Undercover is about this. Now, it's not based on personal pain, but it's observing something that is a beautiful landscape in the United States, and that's Bryce Canyon. And if you've ever been to Bryce Canyon, you've seen how beautiful it is from afar, but perhaps also how dangerous it is if you happen to be in the midst of it. I mean, if you fell in there, you would be severely hurt. But again, it's beautiful from afar. And I think that's what Grace is about. It's not necessarily beautiful up close, but we need to look at the overall picture. Grace Undercover. There's blood in the grooves of a dried up soil. Our ground still screams for memories fast gone. Life ends again where a seed was to grow. Mountains neighbor the deep canyons next door. Tightrope walkers hesitate to take on a promenade, considering abysses as they stand atop a chimney to the core of a living body of molten desires for an unknown future. The treacherous journey will continue, perhaps, until we open our eyes and trust, blind to the light, into a final leap over the obscure depths of dying souls. So this is a leap of faith, right? Well, this one is similar. Again, I traveled through many national parks in the United States, and this is not actually a national park. It's a place I discovered by accident in Utah, and it's called the Valley of the Gods. And when I was there several years ago, it was very, very rarely visited. Sadly, has changed. So this is in the Valley of the Gods. I have walked through Devil's Garden, seeking nothing but the beauty of this world, feeling the remaining heat of a scorching eve. I have driven a carriage upon a road forgotten of this age, encountering the oddities of a future not yet made, questioning whether I must go on to live. I have plunged into the entrails of the earth, following curves into a vertiginous certainty, oblivion at every turn, a terrifying absolution. Yet I stopped in contemplation of a world above. Into a deep night, I swam, guided by a rising current, onto a path made of a molten world to another day. Alone in the midst of growing peaks, I knelt, as darkness fell upon my soul in an explosion of stars, when at last withal, sighing as I greeted the cosmos. I spent quite a bit of time in New Mexico, and I love being in the middle of nature, and more specifically the desert, because I think it's a place where when you're all alone, you really connect with something quite special that those who don't have experience do not connect with. And that may be unknown, that may be terrifying, but it's the essence of the universe. So when I speak of molten lava, or a molten world, I do refer to New Mexico and the fact that there's quite a bit of volcanic land there. Because I want to talk about those people that I observe as well. This one is called Supermarket Dreamer. And this is when I lived in New Jersey for a while. And I remember going to a supermarket one night for the obvious reason. And I saw a man who was very handsome, very tall, very toned, in great health, it seemed. And he was walking with a purpose through the aisles, and he looked happy. And I really enjoyed watching him, so confident. And then I saw him at the register, and all he had bought was a pack of bologna. And then I thought, it was a poor neighborhood, and I thought, this man bought something that is going to mean something to his family, even if it's just such cheap and probably pretty bad food, I'm not sure. But he was excited about it. And that's why when I look at people who have little, I think about how much I must respect that having little can mean so much to them. So this is the Supermarket Dreamer. To the cornucopia of endless feasts, he rushes, giant in the labyrinth, legitimate hunter of a thriving tribe. His soul shines with the smiles of destinies when he will return to the hearth, his fists filled with nectars of distant lands. I saw him once before in the mist, carrier of gentle thoughts for all, on a mission to share his modest glee. Racecar driver between the solitary aisles, the lengthy limbs carefully slalom between the pillars of this odd temple. Caretaker of those he nurses with his lifeblood, he might as well dance on his way to the gates, leaving behind the daily din of this glass palace. That's a visit to the supermarket. There's another one about a person, and that one is called Skeleton Man. This is very recent. Well, the other one's recent as well, but the experience is older. The experience is very recent in this one. I drive about less than 5 miles every day to come to my office. And I drive through a neighborhood that is to say the least, not very wealthy at all. And I see men and women who ride bicycles, who walk, and who stand by the entrance to convenience stores and gas stations. And they seem to spend their lives there. And this one is called Skeleton Man, and it's about a man I observed one day. And I gave him a name. I have no idea what his name is, but I called him Joe. Skeleton Man. Joe, I think, I heard his name called at the station, leaning against the post of a rotten frame, a wet cigarette dangling from the crumbling flesh. Joe, a voice inside echoed, as if a stick figure, something like an arm, moved, holding a can of the cheapest brew he could afford. He spat black tar to the wind. Content in the fumes of gasoline pump, Joe, the young man carrying the weight of centuries, every day idle as if it were a choice, a meaning lost in the smog of dying dawns. The face engulfed in a praying bush of wild curls, eyes sunken in a vain attempt to escape, the view of a sunset far too distant, dreams drawn in an old schoolboy's notebooks. He rides his old wheels from one corner to the next, braving wind, sleet, and hurricanes. The fading butt in the terrified beak, he barely remembers when he drove the rusty truck. A skeleton, barely a reminder of the man he once was, eaten by smoke and beer and the disintegration of his hopes. He still smiles when answering the question of his purpose. Joe replies, "It's a living, ain't it?" And again, I also think of perhaps this man is not a young man. He once had dreams as well. And what happened to these dreams? And really, I should stop and speak with him and ask him. And maybe one day I will do this. Let's see, this one, some of these are going to be, I'm not sure this is one of them, but I remember one when it was published in a magazine and the editor said it made her cry. I'm not sure it's this one, but it's possibly that some of them may definitely do that to me, for example. Breaking Away is one of those that is probably quite sad. Take those limbs and tear them apart. Give them away to the needy. For love, for pain, for a breath, come at last. Explode the tears, banish the soul. Grab of those insides, feed them to the dogs. Shed the juices of vague sweetness and steal. Twigs in a game of poker for the destitute. Trap the heart, squeeze it in the fatal vice, slowly moving between galaxies and destinies. Capture the breath in the infinite cosmos. Dim its light and crush its last hope. It is time to break this life in two. And this is, I can be honest, I'm sure, probably a day I didn't feel very good about who I was or who I am. And it's possible that many of us have these days from time to time. And this is a day when you feel that your life may be they serve best being owned by someone else. I had another poem that I wrote, which is not in this collection, which is basically Parts for Sale. And that basically referred to giving your body to those who need it when you feel that it's useless to you. That's kind of sad, isn't it? But it comes directly from the heart. This one is called Words of Silence, in Silence, I'm sorry. And this one is inspired by my poetic hero. I wrote a dissertation on him, and his name is Charles Baudelaire. And you may have heard of him. He was a French poet of the 1800s, and he wrote The Flowers of Evil. A very complex text, which is often misunderstood. He was not an evil man at all. But he spoke of people who came and went, and whose identity was a mystery, who made no mark on the world. And he felt very bad about this. So mine is Words in Silence, and it's inspired by him. She waved her grace at the passerby, moving a fragment of the universe around ripples to echo through space and time. Her words vanished into unheard waves as lines in her surroundings traced a story on the page of a body in full motion. I wondered why anyone would speak so loudly when she played a symphony in utter silence, through smiling lips of crimson tenderness. She danced on the tile floor made of clouds, sending her message to change all lives in a language common through ages and worlds. And that's really about those who don't make a lot of noise, but do make a lot of difference in our lives if we only take the time to look. And sadly, we don't do that. Let's see, I've got a few more. This one is actually the first one in the collection. Thinking again of subliming, I think about the different ages that we live through. And this is about an odd or old couple, both, and it's called A Pile of Bones. And I try to imagine what it's like when two people come near the end of their lives as a couple, and what is left for them and how they look back to the past. So A Pile of Bones. Odd couple, they stand near a pile of regrets. Heads bowed, their hands cannot quite reach, yet the tingling increased as energy moves. Heaped like a warm fur of a past Christmas night, those naked limbs seem to live a strange parody, at play with the memories of lives they once owned. The glow of the ancient blaze dormant makes like a chapel consecrated to worship eternity. Witnesses, they remain quiet as they ponder a purpose. Still, the emanating recollection permeates their essence, and they vanish in a fiery shower of lost days, while the army of skeletons continues its lifeless dance. Would-be makers of infinite worlds, shall they continue on their stroll through the valleys, forgotten by the giants, or share the treasures offered by these unlikely benefactors? Perhaps they will pursue, as they do into the evening fires, the present chapter of a story without a fertile oasis. They too, bones of moments they could not truly cherish. So can we cherish and hold on to those moments? One that is kind of on the same theme is called Sacred Boneyard. And I reread this one yesterday, but I have to admit that. But this one is kind of similar to that one, actually, of pondering and remembering what life has been, what's left of it, and how we can perhaps hang on to those memories. So it's not about me, obviously. Sacred Boneyard. Looking for parts to upgrade old chassis. Hand in hand, they stroll in search of a miracle. A crow recites the song of his forefathers, perched on the trusted rust of yesteryear. Strange lovers, alien to prettier days, they stare at a would-be sun beyond the storm. Wearing patches of ongoing hopes, they dream, worn-out bones playing a melody, unwillingly playing a melody. Like the old Model T they once drove to the ocean, they fancy a renewal promised on futuristic billboards. New limbs, a little used perhaps, but never broken. Organs made for the universal soldier. Their shoulders touched to the melting spot. Grown like conjoined Siamese legends, they still imagine the sunset of their parents when sitting on the porch of endless possibilities. Hand in hand, they stumble between the rows of cadavers, pressing upon their path into a thicker darkness. No heart to be found here, nor any new fantasies, just the eerie sounds of agonizing carcasses. Not a word is said between those two legends, their lives finished under a reddish realm. One more step, and it is done as if they had never been. A weak aura remains of those ancient silhouettes. Soon others will follow the road already taken, enticed by the gentle pull of a forgotten old couple. So this kind of alludes to the cycle of life, and there's an attempt for them to find a way to survive as well. Another one, this one is more fun. I have a few fun ones here and there, maybe not in this collection. This is about little lives, and I like to look at everything around me. Students ask me sometimes, what can inspire us? And I tell them just about everything. When you drive, of course, you should pay attention to the road, but you should also look around. Everything is worth noticing. And this one is Little Lives. It's about insects, because insects have pretty amazing lives as well. Little lives crawl upon the pane of glass at dusk, forgotten on a nice sheen. Miniature monsters explore mountains of sand, lost in a sea of luxuriant green. No thought of tomorrow in those carefree souls, busy at existing for lack of being. Sensing a breeze, touching a heat, they go on and return to a start as to an end. A symphony of crackles surrounds their feet under a shower of shady rays. Soon night will come again beneath a dark cloud. They will ignore the silence of man. They will continue the endless dialogue of beasts, far greater in eternal numbers, while the rulers of the universe continue to vanish one by one without much of a sound. And this is basically thinking about the insects who don't really seem to care very much about what goes around them. Of course, I don't know if they're aware of the brevity of their lives, but it seems that they're not. While around them, we are so concerned by the brevity of our lives that we give probably things that are pointless, so much attention. These little insects, or big or small insects, whatever, could teach us a lesson as to what is more important. They don't seem to worry about those great dilemmas that we create for ourselves. Let's see, I've got two more here. This one is called Once Upon a Forest. He lived the story of 1,000 years, wanderer in a quest for another wilderness. Often the search ended on the edge of a city surrounded by ancient walls. Hero, hoping for a denouement, he would just fall to his knees. The secrets of a life to be, their prisoner, a lone knight errant touching the frigid stone, listening to the pulse of a stranger, he seems to rest at last, almost alive. Parting the leaves of the antique forest, hoping for a smile, he teases at the gate, while a storm unleashes its ultimate warning upon the frail frame shivering to a crumble. There in the stillness of eternity, he will continue to dream, his fingers holding the chapters revealed. This actually was inspired by the Arthurian legend, or Arthur himself. I taught a course on the Arthurian legend, and of course Arthur is presumed to be waiting to be reawakened at Avalon in England by some legends. And in this case, my knight, he's basically a knight, doesn't actually die either, he just awaits. And this is something that I write about a lot, kind of waiting for the next step. Sometimes I speak with students who are sad or worse, and they have very dark thoughts. And I tell them, I said to them, you know, what always keeps me going is I want to know what happens next. When you read a novel, you always want to know what happens next. And I think life should be that way. We should always hope and bank on what happens next and not give up. All right, and this is the last one I'm going to read today. At this point, I believe. This one is one that one of my colleagues brought up to my attention and said she really liked it best. This is called Christmas in Barbed Wire. And this one is inspired by my two grandfathers. I really want to write more about people that I've known in the future. I've done that to some extent, but I want to do more. And my two grandfathers were in the war. They were, what's the word? Drafted, I suppose, French, drafted the government to fight. And one of them was wounded and later on committed suicide. And the other one was gassed and died at a very young age because of the gas and the effect of gas on him later in life, but still because of the war. So this is Christmas in Barbed Wire. And it's also influenced by the story that I read about where there was a truce between the German and the French. It might be in the English, actually, on Christmas Day, where they both decided to stop the fighting at the trenches. And it was quite unbelievable. Christmas in Barbed Wire. Gas of mustard seeds in a muddy grave, the fizz of copper cones steady as the rain. The fire in his fingers soon will calm the heart, as the lids will close on the shameful spectacle. Wire of thorns among the shriveled roses, a torrent of red and gray will flow near the boots, reflected by a sad moon full of grief, of anger, so many hearts stopped in wait of a sound. The commotion returns as a stone hits metal, with a soft thump mixed of silence and prayers. Lids open onto blue and green and gray and black. Droplets venture upon the soot, carving deep crevices. On the ruined faces of lives not yet loved a moment, and the tears, too, cry in certain agony, as they mirror the sorrow of 1,000 spirits, still holding onto a vague nothingness in moonlight. Gas of mustard seeds, a copper piece in the flesh, dearest memories of hours never spent, of a time frozen somewhere in irreverence, along a river that forgot to run its course. Standing dark against the black sky, shapeless, a man dressed in mud, fleshy matter, and a steel hat, looks for his soul somewhere on the field, seeks the light of a life which ran away. When he could not look, when he was not allowed, they bought it for nothing but a pile of bones, found in a hole where he thought they traded his, in the desolation of a world never completed. Home he dies, the shell of a war that never burst, the shell of a man who remained a boy of 20. At 56, he dies of sweet gas or mustard seeds, and copper gifts from another for a Christmas that never was.